Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I am without an introduction and news clips again. Yesterday it was a surprise getaway with Val. Today it was a surprise work trip to Washington, D.C., because on Monday afternoon I got a call from my friend Laura Coates, who said, could you come down to D.C. and be on my show on CNN tonight? And I said, you know what? Sure. CNN was kind enough to pay for all my accommodations and everything. I'll come down, and I did. So I'm on my way to D.C., and I've got a great conversation with Bill Boyle for you, because Bill and I talked for about an hour. Just before that, we had an awesome conversation. I think you're really going to like it. Bill has become one of your favorite guests here on the show. So thoughtful, articulate, intelligent, funny, and just a great all-around guy. And Bill and I talked about the latest in Ukraine. We talked about how Elon Musk and other billionaires are trying to buy up every media platform. We talked about domestic politics and so much more. I think this was a great one. I'm really happy whenever Bill joins me. You can follow him on Twitter at BillB in DC. He's not a professional pundit, not in it for the money, as we talked a little bit about as well. He's just a super smart guy who maybe I'll get to have a drink with tonight if I play my cards right. Probably not going to have much time. Okay, that's it. Also, I'm planning to have some pretty big name guests joining me on the show this week, like Larry Wilmore, Ali Velshi, and Soledad O'Brien. At least they are scheduled. You never know what happens, but that's the plan as of now here on this independent media outlet. Can't do it without your support, so please sign up to be a paid subscriber if you haven't already. Maybe today's your day. StandUpWithPete.com. Check it out. And now let's go. Time to talk to little Billy Boyle, the Irish Catholic boy from New Jersey. And we're using new technology to talk, so you'll hear Bill crystal clear. There won't be anybody stepping on anybody. Not that anybody's complaining. Everybody always loves when you're here, but you like this type of
I do.
Technology. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I like when you reach out to me to say, hey, are you paying attention to this if you want to talk? Because it often means I was missing something. But as we're talking before here, I want to start not in Ukraine, but something I think it's fair to say is related to it if you want to tie Elon Musk into it. I want to start with anti-Semitism, Bill Boyle. There has been a real bad couple of weeks, starting with, you could start 5,000 years ago, but I'm talking about like from Kanye West's comments the other day on Twitter, which have gotten him in a lot of trouble. It'll be interesting to see if business partners, I think his bank already kicked him out, JP Morgan. Then you've got Donald Trump with his horrific statement over the weekend, I guess it was, about American Jews better catch up before it's too late with the Israelis and all of that. I am paraphrasing all of this, but then there's an Elon Musk tie-in here because of the media platforms. Tie it all together for me, Bill, and tell me why this anti-Semitism and the media platform stuff really matters a lot.
So what you're seeing right now is what I wouldn't call it a concerted effort. I think it's just people responding to incentives, where you have Kanye buying Parler right now. Musk, in his long-running saga, is probably eventually going to own Twitter. Obviously, you have Trump with Truth Social. You have Peter Thiel with Rumble. And there's really a very definite trend in these basically big bullhorn purchases by people with tons and tons of money who have incentives that are very much not democratic. They're very anti-democratic. And, so anti-Semitism, by the way, is very much part of that. I mean, you had tons of anti-Semitism in European democracies that didn't turn into later fascist countries, right? France was famous for its anti-Semitism from Dreyfus all the way through to the end of World War II, yet they resisted fascism intensely. And so you see the anti-Semitism, you see this affinity amongst all of those folks for Putin and for Russian authoritarianism. And in particular, you see with Trump, with Thiel, with Musk, and I haven't heard from Kanye. I'm sure he's got some whack opinion about it. But this sort of very long-running desire to kind of give in to Putin. And, oh, no, we can't have World War III. There's obviously a thing happening here. And what that thing is, I think, is folks looking to 2024 and believing that if they have control of and the ability to direct the social media conversation on these big platforms, then they can affect the 2024 election in a way that benefits them personally. I think this is mostly about money, and I think it's about power. And it's really bad. And we're seeing it, with the anti-Semitism part, what you're seeing is that these folks look at the world and they start organizing it in ways that fits them because they get a ton of opprobrium. Kanye says crazy shit. Elon Musk says dumb things. They get slammed and they feel it and they see it. And so what happens is almost ineluctably, they go to the people who don't slam them, right? They go to that island of sort of safety, which for them is the authoritarian loons, the pro-Russia people, the anti-Semites. And what you're seeing with a lot of this is super interesting is Trump and Kanye in particular are talking about like the good Jews and the bad Jews. And that in places like France before Vichy and even in Germany up until the rise of the Nazis, that was very much an underlying statement you saw all the time. Vienna, Germany had really insane and really nasty anti-Semitic politics in the 1920s forward. And they very much made that sort of distinction. Like there are good Jews and bad Jews. And there are Jews, and then there's the foreign cosmopolitan ones.
Right, yeah.
And so there's a history and there's like a progression you see. There's a reason that the World War II generation that came back from World War II, like my dad, had absolutely zero truck with anyone saying someone is like, oh, that guy's an okay Jew. My father would be like, I'll punch you in the face. That's not a thing you say. Because having witnessed fascism and anti-Semitism on the ground in Germany in the 1940s, they knew that once you start slicing that salami, at the end, the lunch you're eating is authoritarian dictatorship.
So there potentially there is this even more divided, siloed media atmosphere in the run up to 2024 with billionaires buying the major platforms. I mean, hey, at least we still have Facebook. Maybe we should bring MySpace back. I mean,
exactly. And what you're seeing is that we already are very siloed. But for these people like Musk, just having places where people generally agree with him isn't enough. They want control of the silo, right? They want to direct the silo. They want, Musk wants, for instance, the first thing he wants back when he wins control of Twitter, if he does, he's going to put Trump right back on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. That everybody, right? Pretty much everybody who thinks about such things, and I think Musk has even said it, that's a pretty safe bet. How safe of a bet is it that this deal goes through, though, that Musk takes control of Twitter?
So I would direct people to Puck, which is Julia Yoffe's, publishing vehicle online. She has, someone wrote for her an article. I'm not sure who it is, but it's basically about how the financing of the deal that Musk is working on is actually pretty complicated.
The Elon financial mindfuck.
That's the one. Nailed it.
Written by William Cohen.
Exactly. Everyone should read that. Okay. It's excellent. And it gets into a world that I don't understand very well, which is sort of the high-level financing of multi-billion-dollar deals. What it comes down to is there's about $13 billion that they have to find or flat out pay for. Musk doesn't really have the money for a variety of reasons, and that money will be purchased by people like Apollo Capital, who are the kind of folks who lend to own, which means I lend you money, I get to pay 50 cents on the dollar for those shares because you desperately need somebody to buy them. And then if you miss a single payment, I take your company. I take control. That's where Musk is. Musk is out in the sort of spec lending where you're getting the worst possible deal. It's the equivalent of buying a house that's like a lease to own, where if you miss a single lease payment, you lose the house.
Why is Elon Musk in a corner financially when he is the richest man in the world?
Well, rich on paper is different from rich and liquid.
Right.
Tesla's value has been collapsing, especially since his latest Russia comments, which is interesting. Basically SpaceX is doing well. Some of his projects are doing well, but he is also putting on the block a bunch of his Tesla stock as collateral for the loan to buy Twitter. And then the value of that Tesla stock is dropping as well as Twitter stock. So the deal starts, and he's committed, by the way, he's committed to $54 and change per share.
Mm.
So Twitter's stock price might be going down. That doesn't matter for the deal at all. It could go to zero. it could be 1 cent for a share of Twitter. Musk still owes $54.11 or something.
Yeah, that's tough. Good.
Yeah, so his what he's put in hock to do the deal has lost value. And then the asset he's trying to buy has lost value, which means, of course, if I'm Apollo, if I'm going to get in on this deal, I'm not going to give him any terms except terms that are fantastic for me. Because you're taking a risk.
Yeah, okay. But do those terms end up in ownership being shared by, thus Twitter being controlled by, thus the only thing that matter what becomes of Twitter?
My understanding is that what happens is that if they lend him the money, if he fails a payment, screws up in any significant way, they have control of the company. End of story. They're not sharing management with him before that point. But I can tell you that Apollo will probably be saying to him, we'd really prefer if you did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Because he knows they have an axe hanging over his head.
So it remains to be seen what will happen in terms of the Twitter that we know, what it will change, if at all. It remains to be seen. Right. But it's likely, I think it's fair to say, given the timeline of this, that we will see major changes to that platform. It's likely before the next presidential election.
I think it's 50-50 that Musk even finally goes through with the sell.
Right. Okay. So maybe we won't. Yeah. I mean, it's 50-50. That's really the thing. I think people were so impatient. We hear all this stuff about this deal. I'll speak for myself. And I'm like, all right, could you just tell me what's going to happen to Twitter? What does this mean for Twitter and how I see tweets and whose tweets? And is Trump back on? And is every other Christian nationalist, white supremacist back on? So, all right, let's get to then. I wanted to ask you before we get specifically to Kherson. I pronounced it Kherson, and you forgave me because you said even some Russians do it. But before we get to that, what was the deal with, what is this Elon Musk Starlink? It's this great technology which allows you to have an internet connection from almost anywhere in the world. It's sold commercially to people with, I see commercials coming through, people with RVs. And apparently it's really great technology. It works pretty well. You got to pay a subscription fee. He gave it to Ukraine for free, and then he said, you know what, you gotta start charging you. And then he said, you know what, forget it, sorry, you can keep it for free. How'd I do?
You did well. The only thing that's wrong is saying that he gave it to Ukraine for free. He never did.
Okay.
He 85% of all the Starlinks in Ukraine, at least, that's the minimum that has been proven so far, were paid for by somebody else. What Musk is doing is basically saying, here's how many Starlinks there are. They cost $4,500, and then the highest level of service is X. Say that's $500 a month, and that's how much it cost me. That's bullshit on a number of levels. A lot of times they were bought directly by Ukrainians. They were bought by Ukrainian organizations or bought by the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine, but a great amount of them were bought and paid for by the U.S. government. Musk has been getting paid. He made up the math on the $100 million that he lost. He made it up completely. And what happened, you'll notice, is he was running around saying, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop this. And then once people started saying, whoa, here's my bill that I paid you. Once his bullshit math was going to fall apart, that's when he turned around and said, oh, that's fine. Okay, we'll take care of this. He is full of shit. I think he might be losing a little bit of money, but he's not losing 100 million. And I would be shocked if he's losing 5. And add on top of that, as a business guy, right? I look at that as putting Starlink in to Ukraine, and particularly the Biden White House letting him take the credit for it. That's worth $100 million in advertising, right? I mean, these are not guys doing this out of the goodness of their soul. That saying that Starlink is what saved Ukraine in a war against this incredibly nasty colonial oppressor, I mean, that's worth billions of dollars over time. So Musk said a lot of very specious things that are not supported by fact, and said it in a very sort of hard way that he tied to all kinds of things that Putin wants. And I should be more clear. Musk said this while pairing it with, here is what Vladimir Putin wants to end the war. Now, he didn't say it that way, but he was parroting precisely what Putin was saying. When you link those two things, right, and then you link in that they were turning off, they were geofencing Starlink into the areas where Ukraine was launching their offensives.
Yeah.
Where Ukraine profoundly depends on Starlink for running its drones, which means directing its artillery, which means keeping its units in contact with each other, which means making sure logistics gets where it goes. That is basically cutting. We would imagine in World War II, it would be like if a company had the ability to turn off all the radios.
Right.
For
That's
a unit
a great
in combat.
analogy.
That's what Musk did. And what people need to get in their heads, Musk got people killed, and he literally made it easier for Russia to hold on to its imperialist games.
He's a terrible Hall of Justice. I mean, Legion of Doom. I get my Super Friends sanctuaries mixed up, but he is a terrible guy, very well established. One more thing, though, on him as we tiptoe into Ukraine, which is about the controversy over his communications or not with Vladimir Putin. Can you remind me? I mean, time moves so quickly, news and controversies, and the fact that Elon Musk and Donald Trump have to insert themselves into our every single day with insane stuff that I would argue we can't ignore. Certainly in Musk's case, much less.
No, I mean, because Fiona Hill today was talking about how what Musk is doing is basically promoting Putin's propaganda and doing it knowingly.
Well, a lot of people in the West and in the U.S. media, much less Congress, are doing that. So it's not just him.
Yeah, I mean, and so, but the thing about this, and I think that what you're going to see is Musk backing away. It's one thing to fuck with the U.S. government on your Starlink contract. It's another thing to fuck with the Pentagon and take credit for something that they paid for. But when you start to fuck with the actual machinery of a war that's in progress with 140 countries supporting it, and with in D.C. decisions being made, like I would argue the rapidity of our pull out of Afghanistan, right? That happened in part the way it did because of what we saw coming in Russia. When you're dealing with a situation where people are willing to say, you know what, we're going to get crushed for a long time about how quickly we pulled out of Afghanistan and how bad it went for our allies there. Where do you think Musk and his federal contracts and his personal reputation stand in that in the machinery of a conflict that big? They're nowhere. They will crush him. He will be thrown into the machinery, chewed up and spit out. And I think on some level, it's why he's sort of backing away from all this, because I got to tell you, Pete, Logan Act is a thing and it never gets used. But Musk is sort of getting close to that point, and it might be, I think that in the next year or two, we're going to see some indictments that have never happened in American history, and Musk is in danger of being one of them. The
Logan Act is the United States federal law that criminalizes negotiation by unauthorized American citizens with foreign governments having a dispute with the United States. The intent behind the act is to prevent unauthorized negotiations from undermining the government's position. Now, even if you could make a successful argument that Elon Musk or anybody else should be prosecuted because of the Logan Act or what it says, I would imagine, knowing nothing, that every country has some kind of similar rule that says, listen, you can't go out and negotiate on our behalf. Sure. Because you're going to, that's the government's job. The people elected us to do that. They didn't elect you to do it. And it doesn't take a rocket science of democracy to establish that kind of idea or clause, probably in every country's constitution or federal justice system. I don't know.
And I think where it gets sticky for Musk is that clearly Starlink took substantive steps to make it harder for Ukraine to win the war, or at least to have an offensive. Right? You see these Ukrainian offensives that kind of go like a certain distance, then stop. I don't know yet, but I think that we'll find out whether they had to do that because they were held back by the geofencing that Starlink did. And if so, that's way beyond the Logan Act.
Okay, so let's move on from Elon Musk's potential to be prosecuted by the Logan Act and his ego, which is very hard to move on from. It's very difficult to get away from it. Just out there every day, just inserting himself in so many ways. He comes out with novelty items like a flamethrower. He recently put out a perfume or a cologne or something, and then he goes and says that just sold 20,000 of these for $200. just made a cool million. And it's like, wait, aren't you the car guy? Then it's like, wait, aren't you the rocket guy? Wait, aren't you the Starlink guy? Aren't you the solar panel guy?
Yeah, I preferred my name for his perfume over the one that he gave it.
Oh, I used it on the TV show I do.
Nice. Dilettante for Men?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I used it, and then I was going to say, that's what my friend Bill Boyle, like I was going to give you credit, and I was like, it'll take I have 7 seconds here. I can't give Bill credit. I just have to lift it. But I do want to publicly say I lifted it, but I did share it on Twitter. So it's the ethics of my stolen joke. They're questionable. I'm not going to say they're not. Okay.
Where did you do this?
I did it on News Nation Friday night. They asked me about that specific thing, and I didn't have anything at the ready, and I was like, I'm barely paying attention to that story, and I was like, I think Bill had a great joke about that. And you see me, I think, stutter, trying to think about in my brain, should I say, oh, my friend Bill. Yeah. I realized there was not enough time to explain who you were, and that you tweeted it at, and it just would have looked
I'm actually fine with that, because what is awesome about that to me is that like somebody like Rick Wilson or Julia Yaffe will happen to see that and be like, "Oh, damn it, the Boyle strikes again."
Yes, they gave you credit. That's where the ego boost comes from. Me saying it on News Nation, you don't mind, but them resharing such a great joke, that means a lot to the way you feel about yourself.
Well, and I'm more amused since I don't really care about ever being famous or making any money from any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm more amused by promulgating the idea that maybe I am in the CIA and maybe I'm influencing the media.
How do you say that? Promulgate earlier.
Promulgate.
You earlier promulgated that when you told me that you have a computer, but it doesn't have a microphone. I was like, there's just more evidence. Who doesn't have a microphone? It's not broken. You're wealthy. I mean, come on. You don't have a computer with a broken microphone. You have a special computer with no microphone because you are, in fact, a secret agent.
Only for the parking industry. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well,
federal parking. Come on. Best cover ever.
Still have a lot of questions. Yeah. Okay. Questions remaining about how Bill knows so much and so many. Can we now get to what's happening specifically on the ground in Ukraine? So much. Another strike, by the way, in Kyiv, this time using kamikaze drones. I also just read this horrible story that Russian troops killed a Ukrainian musician for refusing a role in a concert. Russian soldiers have shot dead a Ukrainian musician in his home after he refused to take part in a concert in occupied Kherson, according to the Culture of Ministry in Kiev. His name, Yuriy Kerpetenko. I think I nailed it. He declined to take part in a concert intended by the occupiers to demonstrate the so-called, quote, improvement of peaceful life. This is potentially the bravest act of courage that a civilian, in this case, could ever perform. He's the conductor, and he said, I won't participate in this fraudulent concert, and they killed him for it, for what he believed in. And what do you have to say about that? If it's, in fact, exactly what happened, which...
Yeah, no, it's confirmed. It's confirmed. I mean, the interesting thing about that is it tells you two things. It tells you regular Ukrainians in Kherson know that the Russians are going to be gone soon. And it knows that the Russians in Kherson know the same thing. You don't, you want that guy. He's a local influential guy. You don't shoot that guy because he doesn't do one concert unless you know it's probably the last concert you're ever doing there. That's an act of bitterness and vengeance, not of social coercion.
Let me read from an expert in this article I'm reading about The Guardian that I'm sure you can add to this. One of the key components of Soviet policy was the destruction of culture of the enslaved countries, murder of cultural figures, purging of libraries, banning of national languages. The modern occupiers are fully following this strategy, destroying culture, sports, education. And when our territories are deoccupied, we will learn about dozens and hundreds of such terrible stories of destruction and heroic resistance. What do you think of those quotes?
I think it's right. I mean, that was the Nazi style. That was the Soviet style in these conflicts in Eastern Europe forever. I mean, Kaliningrad used to be a German place, and now there's no Germans left, right? It's all Russians. There was a whole exchange of populations at the end of World War II, right? I mean, Russia is still operating in that world where they know that, they fought and lost in Afghanistan. They know that if they basically don't change the population out, they're going to lose a long-term war, right? And change
the population out is not a great phrase.
Well, I mean, kill them, force them to exile.
Could you be a little bit more?
Send their kids to be raised by strangers in Russia.
Yeah.
Give Viagra to your troops to rape and murder. Right. Literally, the Russians are giving Viagra to their soldiers.
Really?
Because they want them to rape people.
Jesus Christ! Come on. I'm looking that up.
It's really true. It's really true. And it's a pitiless, heartless policy. And what's really wild,
a UN official is claiming Russian soldiers are supplied with Viagra to rape Ukrainian women and dehumanize them.
That is true.
That is true. According to, I haven't found it yet. Go ahead.
So it's rape, pillage, torture, destruction as a matter of policy. It's what did Tacitus say about his own Roman countrymen, that they made a wasteland and called it peace, right? And that's what the Russians are doing here. And they're doing it, by the way, because specifically they have the same problem here that they have everywhere else. No one wants to be in Russia. No one wants Russia's system. Nobody who can do anything else with their life, including most Russians, sticks around for it.
Let me read from this.
To destroy civil society in order to do this.
You have to destroy civil society in order to do this. Let me read now. I've got it here. Her name is Pramila Patton. She is the UN's Special Representative on Sexual Violence. So give them that sounds credible. She says when women are held for days and raped, when you start to rape little boys and men, when you see a series of genital mutilations, when you hear women testify about Russian soldiers equipped with Viagra, it's clearly a military strategy. And when the victims report what's said during the rapes, it's clearly a deliberate tactic to dehumanize the victim. Patton said the UN had verified more than 100 cases of rape or sexual assault in Ukraine since Russia launched its invasion in February 2022. She added the number of reported cases is only the tip of the iceberg because sexual violence largely goes underreported in conflicts, which is the point I was going to make if they didn't make it themselves. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, Russia can't win on any of the soft power. It can't even win, frankly, on straight up military power. So their approach is to just be so horrendous, so nasty, so escalatory that everyone just gets tired of fighting them and gives up. And this, by the way, applies to the war in general. There's a straight line between doing that sort of thing and threatening to launch a nuke, right? It's never give up, always escalate, always show the other guy you're tougher and nastier than he is. Russia's problem is that, that their enemies are better at everything except for the rape and torture part. And Russia is in a very perilous military situation right now. Extremely perilous military situation. And we're going to see some big changes in the next few weeks, I think.
Yeah, let's get to that. And let's get to it specifically using, and you're here, so you'll correct what's wrong, but it looks pretty right to me. The Wikipedia entry for Kherson. Ready?
Right.
Here it is. It's a port city of Ukraine. It is located on the Black Sea and is it Dnieper River? Or is that
Dnieper.
It's the home of a major shipbuilding industry, regional economic center. In 2021, the city had an estimated population of 283,000. So I thought that was interesting to learn as I'm prepping to talk to you. Since March 2022, this is where it's relevant. I don't know if Wikipedia's entry is updated. Since March 2022, the city has been occupied by Russian forces during their invasion of Ukraine after the Battle of Kherson. As of May 25th, 2022, the Ukrainian authorities estimated about 45% of its inhabitants had fled the city. Kherson has been the center of the 2022 Ukrainian Southern counter-offensive. Is that all accurate, up to date?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That works.
And so, and then I want to pick up, because I still don't really know, so I'm just turning it over to you. Then I want to pick up where you texted me and said, I think Kherson's going to come unstuck this week or soon after. An avalanche of outcomes will ensue. What are you talking about?
So, sort of big picture, the Ukrainians, if you go, I'll start at the other end of the line and work back, and that will have some relevance and sort of make it clear. In the far northeast, the Ukrainians just keep on sort of leapfrogging through Russian defenses, and they're on their way very quickly to cut off the rail lines that lead to the far early eastern conquest Russia had. So the Russian military lives and dies by rail. They absolutely have to have railroads because that's the only way they can get enough ammunition, men, supplies to the front lines. It's like World War I for them. Well, the northeast assault into Luhansk that the Ukrainians are doing is going to cut off 2 of the 3 rail lines that were supplying Luhansk and Donetsk, which are the southeastern front. All that supplies to supply them, we're going to have to go all the way around to the south, right? Those supply lines that supply the south are also the ones that supply, in part, Kherson and the far west over the Dnieper River. So the Ukrainians are far, 1,500 kilometers to the east, are cutting off supply lines that are going to have sort of a domino effect all the way around to Kherson, which is in the far southwest. They blew the Kerch Bridge, which is another incredibly important link to the southeast, or to the southwest. So in Kherson, they're basically down to 1 rail line that works to get supplies in there. Then you get to Kherson and you have to cross the Dnieper River, where there are 2 bridges that are basically broken. They're doing sort of ferries and pontoons and whatever. In other words, you have this supply line that has just been choked and choked and choked and choked. The straw keeps getting thinner. And the guys that are on the west side of the Dnieper River in Kherson, I would bet you most of those guys have a day of ammunition left at best. And what's going to happen in the next week or 2 is you're going to have people who just don't have ammunition. That's it. And they're not going to be able to continue to fight. And I suspect you're just going to see units, running for the bridges or surrendering en masse. And there's some things you see, like the Ukrainians have air superiority on that side of the Dnieper River, which is shocking because at the beginning of this war, Russia literally had 10 times the airplanes. And the Ukrainians have so effectively used their HIMARS and their Air Force and their anti-air defenses that you now have Ukrainian planes dive bombing Russian units west of the Dnieper River.
Ukrainian planes or drones?
Yes. Actual Ukrainian MiGs doing this.
Really? I hadn't heard
that.
Wow.
Yeah, I've seen video of it a couple times, like 3 times in the last week. So what that means to me is just Russia's advantages in every phase they started out with are just slowly whittling away. Now, when and if Kherson collapses, that front collapses, the Ukrainians are going to sweep up to the river. You're going to have Russians in boats trying to swim the Dnieper in the wintertime, right? Good luck with that. It's going to basically make sure that Russia can never again go farther west. And now you're down to just 2 fronts, Zaporizhzhia over to Donetsk and then up to Luhansk, which means, again, the Ukrainians just get to continue to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. And by the way, Russia, ended its conscription. They said they're going to end it in 2 weeks. The only reason they're ending their conscription, quote unquote, in 2 weeks is that the normal conscription cycle starts in 2 weeks. So Russia's just going to keep pulling in men who don't want to fight and throwing them in.
I had not heard that anywhere else either. And by the way, they were making deals with people who had life sentences in prison, murderers.
Yes. One guy got life in prison for being a cannibal, and he is now at the front. Yeah. So
he was a cannibal in jail, and now he's on
the front.
The front lines of the war.
I mean, I'm sure the Ukrainians have that guy's picture up everywhere. I mean, he's a dead man as soon as he won't survive capture.
One guy was a murderer. I read the story. They let him out, and I think there's a few at least. They go to the front. They get blown up. They live, but they get to serve. They don't have to go back to jail. Like the guy, he got out of his life sentence. Putin's like, you can go fight, and here's the deal I'll make you. If you lose a leg, you still have to go. And that's exactly what happened. So he lost his leg, but he doesn't have to go back to prison. Good deal. Good deal for him.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. They're signing. Wagner is showing up and signing. They're allowed to sign commutations for everybody who goes.
I mean, it's interesting to note that a few weeks ago, maybe it was when we saw the headlines, maybe they started long before, and I don't know what the numbers are of men just streaming out of the country because they knew what was going to come, which is what I saw another report where the police, the special police, whoever, the Russian authorities are just waiting inside apartment buildings or schools or something for young men to leave.
Yeah, the Oman. Yeah, the Oman is doing that. Yeah. Yeah, there's big apartment blocks outside of Moscow, and you just hang out around the elevators and the stairwells. And these 20-year-old guys either hide in their apartments forever or go to get a cup of coffee, and 3 weeks later you're in Luhansk getting shot at by guys who are 10 times better equipped and trained.
Well, that's the other most important point about this. You can't just grab just anybody on the street and throw them into a war. I mean, that's literally, it's like they're going to make a movie where the time span of the movie is actually real time. Here's a guy, you grabbed him, gave him a gun, you showed him how to load the clip, and then you just sent him out there to get shot, blown up. Well, they are. I mean, just to be clear, the numbers of Russian casualties and deaths are just, I mean, Bill, maybe you have some figures as to compare it to any recent armed conflict in world history, any recent one.
The Ukrainian General Staff just put something out yesterday where they think that the Russians are losing 6.5 men for every 1 man they lose.
Insane numbers.
Which I think, I used to kind of denigrate the numbers I was seeing. But I think we're in a phase now where it's gotten so crazy. I think the Russians have lost 100,000 men dead.
That would be
or wounded beyond any capability of coming back to the battlefield.
Certainly, probably a lot of wounded. I mean, I'm surprised by how many.
But in that sort of calculation, right? It used to be, because we're used to Western countries with casualty evacuation. That you get 1 guy dies and 4 are wounded, because the Russians pretty much don't bother with any of that. I think you're talking probably 3 guys dead and 1 wounded. I think that it's reversed. I think that if you're wounded in that war and you are not very lucky, I think you're probably going to die if you're on the Russian side.
Yeah, you're not getting medevaced out.
Like a big way to look at all this too is, when this war first started, and Julia Yaffe and I were texting each other, disagreeing about what was going to happen. And when it did finally happen, I said, "What do you think this scenario comes out to be?" And she said, "Nicholas II in 1917."
I don't know what that means. She was saying
they're going to do crazy stuff that's going to weaken the government, and eventually they're going to lose, and then whoever's in power is going to get thrown out. But what you're seeing right now, with total disregard for the health of the troops, total disregard for their training, just throwing bodies to the front, and just really not giving a fuck about anything, but just throw those poor bastards. And by the way, like the State Duma in Russia, someone wanted to pass a law that any of them who was of age and their kids had to go and fight. And they were like on TV, like, how dare you come up with a law that we have to fight? And that's exactly what was happening in Russia from 1914 to 1917. The well-connected, the rich were getting out of it. And the poor suckers were all going and getting slaughtered in badly trained, badly armed, badly directed armies. And those guys then, one day they woke up and said, fuck this. Like, we've got the guns. Why would we? And they started, this term Soviet means like a committee. And Soviets were literally guys in military units saying, okay, shoot the officers, and then let's elect a committee to run this unit. And that spread throughout, particularly around St. Petersburg, where all of a sudden these army units aren't saying like, oh, Commander so-and-so told Colonel whatever to do this. They would get a phone call or, a message and say, we want you to march wherever. And they would say, we're voting not to do that. Right? And
why don't they do that now?
Well, I have seen some video there was this video where some drunken conscript was given a rifle. And the unit is sort of a mixed unit that's getting put together to go to the front. And there's clearly guys there with a lot of military experience who are just privates. And in Russian, they're saying, who the fuck gave this guy a rifle? What the fuck is wrong with you? And they look, and there's 5 officers all nervously smoking at the corner of the field. And the guy says, look at those idiots nervously smoking over there. And these are a bunch of guys with AK-47s, AK-74s, I should say. And they're like, the officers aren't doing shit. They run over, they grab the drunk guy and take his weapons away. But like, you see right there what's happening, which is already the ranks are starting to say, we're just taking control of this shit.
Yeah, you can't. You can imagine if you're a trained soldier and then all of a sudden the guy right next to you just got forced in because he made a deal, even though he might also eat you if things get bad.
Right, exactly. Can you imagine? Right, that guy's face was all over Russian media.
Oh yeah.
Can you imagine what happens the first time anyone is in the woods with that guy on a patrol? You know,
Yeah, they get eaten. The guy's a cannibal.
No,
like,
I mean, you and I would look at each other and say,
oh,
click,
yeah,
click, boom. Like, I mean, you know, like, it's such a crazy thing. And it tells you, you know, it's one thing before the war, everybody sort of looked at capacity. Well, Russia has this many people. Russia has this many tanks, that, et cetera, et cetera. And they looked at that quantitatively, I should say. That's different from capacity. You could have tons of shit. The Iraqi army was enormous.
Right.
In 1990.
But they have no idea what they're doing, and they don't want to be there.
They didn't have the mental, logistical, military capacity to use. You know, just tons of shit lying around doesn't make you an army.
Yeah. I mean, the Taliban knew how to conduct a flanking maneuver, much less any other number of military strategies. And these guys are just getting sent in, and they don't want to be there, and they're at each other's throats. And I mean, it's just...
It's a recipe for a collapse. And this gets us, by the way, to the next thing, which for like about a week and a half, I didn't come on your thing, and I didn't come on the Thursday night thing because I was too deeply depressed to talk about it. Mm. This was right after Putin, in effect, just nailed his flag to the flagpole and said, "We'll do whatever we need to do to win this war." And at that point, I thought, "Oh shit!"
And by that you mean the rallies he held, the statements he put out, etc.
Yeah. And I just was like, man, these assholes just blocked any easy exit out. They just made it impossible for themselves to back out. I have since sort of softened on that feeling, in part because of some things that have been happening. But for instance, Putin is now cracking down on the mill bloggers, the right wingers who were criticizing the war. They cracked down on them. He obviously going to Elon Musk and all these people is certainly a signal that they're trying desperately to find somebody to talk us out of where we are now. Peskov came on, that's their main spokesman, and said, well, you know, some things are Russian, some things are annexed, and some things are not. We're trying to figure out where the borders are. Obviously, they have, I think what happened is they thought they were going to freak the West out. And instead, what they did was created a whole blow up of extremists in Russia. And Putin went, whoa, I could lose control of the nuts if I keep
I could lose control of the nuts.
To the nuts. Yes, to the nuts. Yes, I assume Putin is well in control of his own testicles. But
I mean, the calculation, I wasn't trying to be funny. I mean, like you're talking about the right wingers who are starting to criticize the war. They supported Putin before this. And so if he's losing them, then he's concerned about losing power because they're a huge part of his base.
Yeah, they're probably 15% of the population loves those guys. But the thing about those guys is they are well-trained military guys to a great degree. Who are these guys? I'm sorry, now I'm lost. A guy named Igor Girkin.
No, but they're the bloggers.
They're called mill bloggers, and these are guys like the guys who helped take over Donetsk and Luhansk. A lot of those guys are on the internet now, and in Russia, they're full of shit most of the time.
These are I'm sorry, I got lost earlier. It's
military bloggers.
They are military bloggers. They're not a military unit on fighting.
No.
Okay,
no.
Got it.
Yeah,
sorry,
they're like citizen journalists who were Russian.
I've not heard that word. If it's an American thing as well, I didn't know. You sometimes use words that people don't know. So
sorry about that.
So if he's losing them, if Putin is losing the right wing military bloggers in Russia, then that means what?
Well, he's losing them because they are honestly saying, "Man, this war sucks, and we're doing a terrible job."
Yeah,
and so that's where he lost them. His solution to that was to take the most prominent one and put him in a unit fighting in Ukraine. Like, oh, you're gonna. They threatened to arrest them all for sedition, and then he took the most prominent one, got handed a rifle, said, "If you want to go fight so much, go fight." And so it was Putin re-exerted control over the extreme right wingers that support him. It's an interesting thing that he is taking. He created this blow up, but he's clearly taking steps to tone it down.
It's interesting to compare it to our situation too. I've always kind of thought that when any politician, but specifically obviously Trump or anybody else on the right, loses the support of Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, Sean Hannity, and all of the rest, which there are so many very influential right wingers, then they would have to, in this case, change strategy. And that's what it sounds like you're saying, that Putin is thinking twice about the strategy as a result of losing the support of his people. Although, ironically, he still does have the support of Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I think for Putin with Russia,
it's not ironic at all. Actually, I don't know why I said
right. Between Russia and the U.S., the difference is that these people might potentially actually kill Putin and throw him out of power. So it's very much, it's not like, am I going to lose clicks or whatever? It's a knife fight and a very bloody one. And the fact that he's reasserted control over that makes me feel a lot better. There's also, I've done a lot of, people talk about nuclear weapons and, oh my God, what if it happens? Russia has a problem in that a couple of battlefield nuclear weapons will engender all of the world's opprobrium, everything bad that you can possibly imagine. China will flip out, India will flip out, Brazil will flip out, everyone will go crazy, and it won't change the course of the war at all. The only thing that'll change the course of the war is if he really tries to obliterate the country with strategic weapons. It
would also change the course of the war if Putin is decapitated from within somehow. Well,
and this is exactly what I'm getting at, is that there's no, you can't eyedropper your way with nukes into winning a war.
Right.
You just can't. And there's a lot of, Colin Powell wrote this great thing about how they studied that. What if we had to use nukes, tactical nukes, to win in the Iraq war? And he said, by the time you got done with the number of tactical nukes you needed to drop, it was 30, 40 just to win one battle. And he said, and then at that point, why didn't you just nuke Baghdad?
But you're never winning. Exactly. I still don't accept any of that, because if you use a certain type of weapon, you lose the support of your own people, much less the rest of the world. I mean, I think that's you told me early on, you didn't think that Putin would ever use a nuke because of China. China wouldn't let him because of, how the wind blows, literally. And I think that was always a good point. I think it's still a good point, which is why I'm convinced that he won't use a nuke, because if I think you don't have to overthink it. If he uses a certain type of weapon, he will be Gaddafi'd in a pipe drain. I believe that.
I think that something
by his own people.
Yeah, no, and I think that something that happened underlines that danger for him, and not even from his own people. So the Kerch Bridge bomb. Yeah. Right. That was a truck bomb.
Oh, was that the bridge at Crimea there?
Yep.
Okay.
And that was a truck bomb. That was an enormous, enormous truck bomb. It was almost certainly also a suicide operation. Now, we always look at Russia signaling everybody, and we jump up and down about Russia signaling this, Russia signaling that. What are they going to do? Well, the Ukrainians are just as capable of signaling as anybody else. A suicide truck bomb by a Ukrainian on that bridge to hit a major target. It tells the Russians that the Ukrainians hear red line and go, oh yeah, fuck you. Right? Medvedev and Peskov, all these guys had said, you don't touch that bridge. That's our red line. Immediately, the Ukrainians went out and blew the bridge on Putin's birthday. We're not just saying fuck your red line. We're saying fuck you personally. Right? But if you're Russia and you look at that, you realize if they can get a truck bomb, Ukrainians, many of them speak perfect Russian. Many of them have Russian passports. You see these explosions and bombings that have been happening on military bases around Russia. Clearly, the Ukrainians are already running operations in Russia. And it turns out, much to my shock, that Dugina, that Dugin's daughter who got killed, that was the Ukrainians who did that.
How do you know?
The U.S. government just put out a notice. They aired it out last week, and they said, we're telling people to do this so that the Ukrainians don't fuck around like that again. That was in the news last week.
The U.S. did not approve of that assassination?
The U.S. gets very squirrely about assassinations when nuclear weapons are involved, because you don't want to have Putin get killed by by a truck bomb. And then some lunatic who you don't know is in charge, and maybe he nukes something out of retaliation. Right? It's inherently destabilizing and escalatory for us to be involved with anything like that. What Ukraine is saying, though, is that we literally have suicide bombers, which we can use.
Yeah.
We can destroy major assets. And by the way, motherfuckers, we can do it in Moscow.
They are bad.
So
they're bad men.
Yeah.
I'm saying that.
And so
they're fierce warriors in it sounds like in ways that they are just not scared to die, and they're not willing to negotiate to give up their home. And I mean, I just always want to remind people when it comes to Ukraine about, I think it was 2014, when the young people in that country stood up and protested for months on end in the cold to get rid of a corrupt leader. And they did, and they won. And it was a great thing for people of our generation to witness. It was a revolution that was done by young people to get rid of a corrupt leader who was basically a client of Russia and Putin.
And do you know what started that whole ball rolling?
I forget. I remember. I forget what it was, but it was very interesting. Remind me.
Yanukovych ran on the platform that he would bring Ukraine into the EU.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Well, that was Boyle for years. Those are the attitudes in Ukraine. Those are the kind of different theories. Should we join with Russia? Should we join with the rest of the world or the West? And he won
all through Luhansk, Donetsk, etc., by large margins in the supposedly Russian affiliated parts of Ukraine, right? The Russian-speaking population of Ukraine voted for Yanukovych to go into the EU. Then when he got pressure from Putin and he reneged on it, that's what started the Maidan. So all of those protests from the 2013s that led to the 2014 war, which then led here, comes from the beginning from Ukrainians not wanting to be part of the Ruski Mir, the Russian world. They want to be part of the West. And Russia's problem is, A, they just can't compete with that. B, they have, we talk about, it's weird. We talk about how, like, what if we give Putin no choice? He might launch a nuke, right? That's Elon Musk's approach.
Well, a lot of people think that.
Right, but the Russians are not giving the Ukrainians any choices either. And so the Ukrainians have every motivation. They're not fighting to lose a province. They're not fighting to lose or to, give up a city. They're fighting for their actual existential national life. And the Russians are not. And that's the bottom line. Putin could pull out tomorrow, and Russia would be in a better place than it is now. Ukraine couldn't say, I guess we're going to stop fighting and be in a better place. They'd be in a far worse place.
I think you illustrate the two different sides' interests perfectly well there. And if people aren't familiar with, I always forget the name of it too, Maidan, the Maidan uprising, wave of demonstrations and civil unrest in Ukraine began in November 2013. Wow.
Yep.
And then we just talked all about it. Agreement was signed in February of 2014 by Yanukovych and leaders of the parliamentary opposition that called for the creation of an interim unity government. And then that the country moved closer to the West with that revolution succeeding. And with the majority of, I think, young people, the majority of people in Ukraine, right, obviously, on the side of that. And that led to Putin losing power there and seeing the potential to lose power elsewhere. And therein lies his invasion. And it's just so, I think about I think a lot about the U.S. invasion to Iraq, because I often find myself thinking about Americans and American foreign policy analysts criticizing Russia's Putin. And I think about Bush and Cheney in Iraq a lot, and there's a lot to be said about those comparisons. But
and there's a weird thing. There's a I'm blanking on his name. There's a leftist African American guy who spends tons of time in Ukraine, and I will think of his name in a minute.
Malcolm Nance?
No.
Cornel West?
Begins with a T. He's literally Ukrainian speaking, been embedded there, studying as a grad student for a long time.
I know him. Terrell Starr. Yeah. Terrell Starr. He's a reporter, journalist.
A great thread out there that people can find. It's basically the progressive argument for why we need to fight in Ukraine. And it's fantastic. And he, there's this thing that people get into where they're like, well, if the U.S. did something bad here 20 years ago yesterday, we can't fight something bad that's happening right now. And it's a terrible, terrible idea. Like, why not use the power of the U.S. for something good? Why give it up? Why let it go? Because the country has guilt for other things.
Well, I think about the something different, the reverse of that. I was talking with Val about this yesterday, this kind of moral dilemma, and I'm sure you have some highbrow philosophy theory about it. But if it were my family, I often think about this. I know you do this obviously as well. If it were my family that were being, my community, my state, my country, attacked similarly in this way, what would I want from the world? What would I want? And do I think it's ethical for other countries, other nations, other communities to support us? When does it become, this is between me and them, or them and me, you just stay out of it? And those seem to be the competing world theories throughout the history of human civilization, right down to tribal warfare, with indigenous people. But I think things are different. We live in a globalized society.
Well,
you can help people with a phone call, a text message, $1, a word. You can do that. I couldn't do that for a tribe all the way across the world, or even across the state. Maybe I don't know. You can do a lot more, I suppose.
Well, and ironically, the Soviet Union saw capitalism as its greatest enemy, right? But when Hitler invaded, did the Soviet Union in 1941 say, we're too good to take guns from America, the capitalist oppressors in America? Did the British, when the Russians jumped in, say, they were friends with the fascists 2 years ago, F them? No, Hitler went to Parliament and somebody said, Winston, how can you possibly say something good about the Soviet Union? And Hitler said, at something like, at this moment, if the devil himself came to help us fight the Germans, I'd find something nice to say about the devil in Parliament.
Well, you just quoted Churchill, but accidentally said Hitler, so it was a real massive
Sorry.
Excuse me. It was really. I'm glad I caught that, because listeners would have
not a Freudian slip there.
Been canceling you. And Hitler said something amazing. Oh no, it was Churchill. My bad. I just got caught up.
Churchill. But so the idea that, I think there's a sort of moral obtuseness to people who just, I'm watching Aaron Mate and Michael Tracy and Glenn Greenwald, and to some extent even Noam Chomsky, call this like a neoliberal war in what the U.S. is fighting, and that we're just trying to extend it and all this other stuff. And it blows me away. It's when you're so stuck in your priors and you're so stuck in your ideology and your record, even, I think, that you can't just say, it's not about me and what I think. These poor people are getting totally fucked up, and America might stink. Okay, fine. Often America stinks. I agree with that. But if we can use that, we can use our industrial might and our power to save people in Ukraine. I think it's profoundly immoral not to do it.
I understand that, but I do think that it's a very convincing argument to make. It's not, I don't agree with it, but it's a convincing argument to make, to say that these wars enrich the military defense industry, the weapons makers, technology makers. And so there's an incentive, and those people obviously fund campaigns and have a lot of power in American politics, and American politicians are beholden to moneyed interests like to defend. And so all that is definitely true. And I think folks who are kind of anti-war on the left, or even libertarian right, they fashion themselves, are uncomfortable with the idea of supporting any war because of that. It's all complicated. I think I think many things, though, can be true. I think that's a phrase and an idea that I've had to learn over and over hosting a show, because you're never going to get ratings if you concede that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Two things, including on the left. Huh?
That's why I'm on. So, yeah. So you have room for me because you have been, you believe in the nuance. But I see those people who loftily decry what's happening, particularly from a left-wing perspective, and I'm talking obnoxious ones like Mate. To me, that's a form of privilege, right? They're sitting safe in their desk in L.A. or in Canton, Ohio, or wherever the hell they are.
Yeah.
And they never have to deal with the other side of it at all. They can just say, we think that, and I agree, U.S. military industrial complex sucks. Like a lot of things suck, but it would be nice just to make things suck a little bit less for people who are just trying to live.
Yeah. The better example right now, because so many people, use or buy the argument, is the pharmaceutical industry, right? I mean, we can talk about starting with the Sackler family and OxyContin and all of the different opiates that are manufactured and sold for years and killed millions probably of Americans, hundreds of thousands of Americans. You could start there, but then you could go, I remember certain drugs, other drugs that were they knew could kill people, and they obfuscated, and people went to jail. I think Vioxx was the name of one of those drugs.
I remember that.
And we can talk about all kinds of other drugs. We can. What I wish we would focus more on is this bullshit supplement industry, which is also a billion-dollar industry. And completely fraudulent. Like at least many of the pharmaceutical drugs are modern miracles. How it's funded, the research. There's all kinds of conflicts of interest and ethical dilemmas, no doubt. But we have to be nuanced and pragmatic about lives lost, lives saved, who wins, who loses. There's a lot of losers.
Would you deny somebody medicine because the pharmaceutical industry sucks? Of course not.
Say it again.
Would you deny somebody medicine because the pharmaceutical industry sucks? Of course not.
Well, the certain sects of certain religions.
Well, because they're assholes, right? I mean, but the idea that we would deny Ukraine military help because we don't like how our military is created and supported is the same thing as saying I'm going to deny somebody medicine because we don't like how the pharmaceutical industry is. That's one point. But the other point, which is a legitimate, I think, question, which you hate, but I agree with you, is if we give them military support, we just perpetuate the war, which is inevitable that they're going to lose. And there's just more suffering. Russia's going to lose. A lot of people would say that Ukraine is going to lose to Russia. That's always been the theory. But now it does certainly seem. And now the same type of people are saying, well, I'm not wrong, because you'll see when he uses a nuke that we were right. This was always going to end this way. We tried to tell you, you kept supporting the war, you kept perpetuating the war. He nuked it. We're right. You're wrong. I think they would have a pretty strong point at that point. Well, I think the problem with that argument is this. If they drop a nuke, it doesn't mean war is suddenly over and Russia wins. That is not remotely the end yet. But say that we just didn't fight in the first place. We let Russia conquer Ukraine. The Russians would have then been in Moldova and in Transnistria. And they're already talking about when this is done. Early in the war, they were saying, their own generals were saying, when this is done, the Baltics are next. Like, this was not, like, people see this as like sort of a one-off thing. It was not ever going to be. From Russia's perspective, they kind of went, they were building up. They did Georgia. They did 2014. Yeah. They were building towards what they thought was a strategy where they could use their nuclear arsenal to seize things. They severely interfered in the U.S. election of 2016 so that they could have a friendly person in power, and this was always part of the strategy, and it worked. Yeah. Although what's interesting is that, thinking on what you just said a few minutes ago, the reality is that if we're talking about pharmaceuticals, the Russian military is kind of the supplements business of the pharmaceutical war. Well, because it doesn't work and it's all bullshit and people pay too much money for it. And, and when you have cancer, you're not going to take the Dr. Oz's vitamin C blast. You're going to go get fucking, interferon and things that actually work, right? So Russia literally sold a brand of power that turned out not to be really that powerful. Yeah, it's a homeopathic military strategy. I think it's fair to say. I think that's is that a metaphor? I think that's accurate. My next bitter blog post is going to be that. All right, let me get one more minute of your time / a few more just to ask you about a domestic political issue, race, obviously, that you're following closely because you're from New Jersey and you know some of the players personally here because you grew up there. But we're talking about the Tom Malinowski, Tom Keene race. Is that right? Tom? Kane, really. Kane, do I have the names right? Yeah. And this district, I'm looking it up. What district is this? 7th congressional district, right? And some are saying that this race, the reason I ask you about it is because A, you know about it, and B, some are saying that it's a bellwether, meaning whoever wins here could be the direction that we're going, and obviously could have a major consequence impact in who has control of the House and whether or not Marjorie Taylor Greene will be the Speaker. Correct. Which I am for, because it has to get worse before it gets better. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a weird race for me because my hometown is in the district. I went to high school with Tom Keene, the Republican candidate. Yep. And part of my family, when they got here in 1870, connected with the Kane family almost immediately, worked for Captain Kane back then in 1872. And our families have been intertwined ever since. Not,
the Boyles and the Kanes.
Well, yeah.
Let me tell you a story.
When they were Democrats, we were Lincoln Republicans. And then when, Al Smith ran for the White House in first Catholic in 1928, and my family became Democrats then, and the Kanes kind of flipped the other way. But we've always been super friendly. We've always known each other. Tom Kane's father, as a Republican, appointed my father, a Democrat, to the state Superior Court.
Holy moly.
And we, I've known Tom Kane Sr., that he was the New Jersey and you perfect together guy. Like, we've known this family forever. Moderate, cool, good people. In the last 30, 40 years, conservative, but like completely moderate, completely cool. Well, Tom Kane running against Malinowski last time. Malinowski's district before redistricting was like plus 10 Biden.
Oh.
After redistricting, it got down to like plus 1 Biden.
Oh, wow.
The Democrats dumped all the Republicans in Malinowski's district. 6 months ago, everyone said Malinowski's toast. In this environment, there's no way.
The Democrats dumped the Republicans in Malinowski. So the Democrats, they screwed over their own guy.
They screwed up. Well, they had to pick who to get screwed, and Malinowski was the one.
Because he was the one that was weaker,
right.
And they thought okay, go ahead, sorry.
Right. So it's been super interesting to watch because Malinowski has been not in any way running scared. He's been out there throwing punches, kicking ass, doing town halls, everything, going to like super conservative Orthodox synagogues and doing town halls. And the really wild thing is that Tom Kane is just not showing up for anything. He hasn't done a single town hall. Nobody gets to talk to him. Right. And he's got a set of websites that are moderate, typically moderate, kind of reasonable to me, new Republican light websites for his campaign. But then he's got another set that are hardcore crazy MAGA websites. And they try to target them to different people.
And his strategy is ads. I saw one of his TV ads, actually.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he's still advertising. He's not meeting with people. He's not taking questions from reporters. He's not. Are they debating? They debated last night. And Malinowski just shredded him, in my opinion. And what you're seeing, what's interesting about this race is that what Tom is trying to do, and again, I will tell you, I know Tom personally. He's a decent guy. But what he's trying to do is present as two different kind of candidates at the same time. Crazy to the Trumpers, normal to the non-Trumpers. Right.
The reason that he doesn't do any town halls or any open things is that people know this and they pin him down on what do you actually, he says he's pro-choice, but then on the MAGA site, it's like no exceptions for the rape and incest or whatever, like just crazy. So it's going to be a race that really illustrates how, if it's possible for a Republican like that to try to speak out of both sides of his mouth at the same time. It's a race the Republicans were certain they were going to win 6 months ago. I think if Malinowski can pull this out, it's a +1 Biden district. If he pulls this one out, I suspect the Democrats are quite close to keeping the House. So early on election night, keep an eye on New Jersey 7, because I think it's going to tell us quite a bit.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything. Thank you for an hour of your time. Always interesting. Sure. This was another great one. I very much appreciate it, sir.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, that's all I have for you today. I will get back to a couple guests to show, I'm sure, later this week, although I've been getting great feedback on the longer conversations with one guest. I'm trying to bring you as much as I can each and every day, but that's what I got for you today. Go follow Bill on Twitter at BillB in DC, and I will talk to you tomorrow on my way back from DC myself. Until then, John Carroll, take us away, brother.
For the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it than now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on.